Hey guys, this is Chris Carlin from AndroidPIT.com. Today we have the Motorola Moto E, the new budget smartphone on the block, and the old school smartphone, budget smartphone I should say, the Moto G. So we put them head to head. They're both super cheap, they're both pretty solid, but let's see which one comes out on top. Okay, so first things first, we've got the white Moto E on the right and the black Moto G on the left. So you can see there's pretty similar things going on design-wise. I don't know if you can pick up the build of the black all that well, but stylistically they're very, very similar. Obviously the Moto G is a little bit larger due to the larger screen, which is 4.5 compared to the Moto E's 4.3. The Moto E also only has quarter HD or QHD, not the good kind, resolution, whereas the Moto G has an HD display. So generally the Moto G is a little bit bigger, but the Moto E is a little bit thicker. But other than that, most things are the same. You'll notice on the back, the Moto E here doesn't have a flash, which is kind of peculiar, and we no longer have speakers on the back either. Up front, we've got basically the same interface. We've got Android 4.4.2 on both. So the other differences on the screen are in pixels. The Moto G rolls in with, 326 pixels per inch versus 256 on the Moto E. So smaller display, lower resolution. Obviously the Moto E is not going to appeal to anyone who wants to watch high quality movies or play HD games. There's not too much difference in processors. They're both rocking 1.2 gigahertz processors, although the Moto E has dual core and the Moto G has a quad core. Now, both devices have 1 gigabyte of RAM backing up their processors, but when we get into storage, you'll see that the Moto E on the side here only has a 4 gigabyte internal storage capacity, whereas the Moto G comes with 8 or 16. The big difference though is that the Moto E actually comes with a micro SD expansion slot in the back. Okay, so if we launch the camera on both, we'll notice something interesting. If we go to the Moto G, we have an option to switch around to the front-facing camera. There's me. Hey, there's Tony. But on the Moto E, that's not an option. The reason for that is there is no front-facing camera on the Moto E. That combined with the fact that we don't have a flash on the rear-facing camera, it makes the Moto E a very poor performer when it comes to photography. The other differences are pretty minimal. I mean, the Moto G has a 5 megapixel camera and so does the Moto E. So the basic shots you'll get from the main camera will be pretty similar. Now you may remember that we did a little bit of a water test with the Moto G. It was quite exciting to know that the Moto G and the Moto X can handle quite a lot of time underwater. That was never advertised for the Moto G, but it seems that Motorola have paid attention and decided to include that in the marketing material for the Moto E. So it's now touted as having a water-resistant coating. But one thing I do notice is the battery cover. It kind of slides around a little bit. It's not quite as solid as the cover on the back of the Moto G, and in my opinion, while the build quality is fairly similar, it feels a little bit cheaper to me. Okay, so the Moto G has the speakers mounted on the back. So there's some Ziggy Stardust for you. So that's the front-facing speakers on the Moto E. Let's turn on Bowie again. So it's sounding a little crisper on the Moto G to me. But I'll let you be the judge when it comes to speaker quality. When it comes to batteries, there's not really much in the way of a difference. The Moto G has, just over 2000 milliamperes, 2070. The Moto E with 1980. You're not going to notice much of a difference though, probably just by the slightly larger screen on the Moto G. When it comes to price though, the Moto G was a bit of a price barrier smasher. It came out with $179 US for the 8 gigabyte and $199 for the 16. The Moto E doesn't have prices globally yet. It's only released in a few markets so far, but it's just been released in Canada at $179, which is the same price as the Moto G with a front-facing camera, dual flash on the back, and double as much internal storage. So that's kind of crazy. In the UK, it's only £89, which sounds fantastic, but obviously the Canadian dollar is not doing so great. We'll see what it's priced at when it gets to the US. But for now, it seems like the Moto G is a pretty clear winner. The basics are all still there, slightly better build quality, better camera options, and obviously on the front, and also it's got double the memory. It doesn't have the micro SD card though, so if expanded storage is an absolute must for you, then maybe you'll consider the Moto E, but otherwise for me it's pretty clear the Moto G comes out on top. So there you have it, guys. The Moto E is basically a cheaper version than the Moto G. But for my money, that little bit of extra money you have to spend to get the Moto G to get those extra features, for me, is the winner. So I would still go with the Moto G. I still think it's the king of the budget smartphones, but the Moto E will certainly appeal to quite a lot of people, and Motorola are pitching it as the replacement device for all those flip phone users out there, and I'm sure it will succeed, especially when it has something like the Moto G paving the way.